I'm about to give you a comprehensive free tutorial on the features and operation of the Pioneer DJ XDJ-RX3 standalone console, focusing mainly on the hardware functions. Now this is a highly capable piece of kit. It's got pretty much everything you'll find on a Pro Pioneer system, but for a fraction of the price and in a much more portable form factor. You can play from USB drives, you can play with DJ software, you can play with 2 laptops at once, with external record decks or CD players, you can mix microphones and other sources into your performance too, and this 10-inch screen is the biggest ever on such a unit from Pioneer DJ. Now, if you're coming to this from another Pioneer DJ model or another hardware brand or another type of DJ system, check out our table of contents. You can hit Control F or Command F depending on your computer. Just type in the keyword, and if we've got a chapter marker for it, it'll be highlighted. Hit the time code and it's going to jump to that part of the video. This is designed to be a video manual, so do feel free to come back and reference it as often as you like. It's 2 hours long, so come back when you need something. Now, if you're a pure beginner or an intermediate DJ, I do have a word of warning. This video alone is not going to be enough for you to play great DJ sets. There's many skill sets and pieces of knowledge that you have to crush it as a DJ. So I can teach you today about this piece of gear, but if you don't understand the rest of the gear you'll need, or how to find and organize music, or the basics of counting and timing and beat mixing, or the skills of programming and performing a DJ set, or indeed how to successfully get booked to play at parties, things of that nature, of course you're going to be frustrated. When I started back in 1992, we didn't have YouTube, we had to learn by trial and error. I learned on cheap turntables on a crappy Gemini mixer. It took me years of frustration before I got good. I remember nearly giving up several times. I'm so glad I didn't, of course, because I stuck with it and DJing became my career and brought me decades of joy. So I'm going to make that promise to you. Yes, if you're new to this, you're going to run into some frustrations, but my job is to get you through them. The teaching style we use here at Digital DJ Tips is to focus on the end result, on actually getting you quickly to be able to play in front of other people. That's where the magic happens. That's where the real learning happens. It's not in your bedroom. It's not in your home studio. It's in front of real people. Now, if you like what you see here, I have got 2 extra resources for you. Firstly, we've got a crash course for beginners. It's called the Complete DJ course, where I teach you all you need to know to play regular DJ gigs fast. And even better, it works not only for the XDJ-RX3, but for all DJ gear. Once you follow the course, you'll be able to play confidently on anything. The video course is about 80 lessons long, it kind of keeps growing, and you get access personally to me as your tutor. It's a phenomenal investment in your DJing. I'll put a link to the course in the description underneath so you can check the course out. There's an info page there whenever you're ready. Now, another great resource is our Amazon best-selling book on how to DJ, Rock the Dance Floor, which is a fantastic primer on those 5 big areas of DJing: gear, music, techniques, playing out, and promoting yourself. This book has helped tens of thousands of DJs to get started. Again, there's a link in the description, but I'll also tell you how you can get a free copy of that book later on. So we've got a tremendous amount of information to cover. So let's get started. The purpose of this part of the video is to get you acquainted with where everything is and the names of it. Everything we talk about here we'll go into in a lot more detail very soon. So to start with, let's look on the top panel. At the top here is the microphone section, which is where we control one or both of the microphones. Moving across to the middle, the touch screen, and also the browse controls that let us choose music from our library. This is the USB area, concerned with manipulating the USB drives that we've got plugged in with our music on them. Then we've got 2 deck sections which are identical. They're laid out identically. Everything about these is the same. Within the deck sections, we've got the jog wheels with their in jog displays, and we've also got the performance pads along with all the other controls that you need to control your decks. Then moving to the center, this is the mixer overall, and this has got some parts that we can split out. The auxiliary input here is for an extra input on top of the 2 that we have here, which we'll talk about in a second. Then we've got the headphone section here. This lets us control everything about the headphones that we listen to independently of what's going on in the speakers. This is the sound color effects. These are effects that you can control using the knobs here, the silver knobs on the channel strips. Then we've got this channel section here. These are the main two channels. Everything up here, including the switches at the top here, are to do with manipulating what's going on with those two channels. And this is the master output level, which is the output level that will be going to the main speakers. Then over here, we've got the beat effects. These effects are controlled by all these knobs and buttons here that give you effects that are either a fraction of or a multiple of the BPM of the song, which is different to the sound color effects, and you can use both of these together. And then finally, we have the booth monitor here. This is for controlling what's coming out of the second speaker, the secondary speaker, which is traditionally something you have in the DJ booth as opposed to the speakers that the master output controls, which will be over on the dance floor. From left to right on the back of the unit, these are our master XLR balanced outputs. These are for using cables that you will run a long distance normally and have a nice clean signal due to the balanced nature of the cables, whereas this is a normal unbalanced RCA master output. Typically you'll use this for shorter cables. And then here we've got a balanced booth output. So this is a separate output to these two with a different volume control as we've seen a little bit earlier. Here we have a USB for plugging a computer in, and we'll talk a lot more about how you would do that and why shortly. Here are our two main channel sets of inputs. We've got both phono and line. Phono is for plugging in record decks that are unamplified, and line inputs is for plugging in standard inputs from things like CDJ players. This is the auxiliary input, which we've looked at the controls for on the top of the unit. And this is a pretty cool little input, just an 1/8" mini jack input for the auxiliary as well. So you've got two choices there for how you plug an auxiliary audio source in. This little pin here is for putting the ground wire on should you have a ground wire on your turntables. Typically Technics turntables will have a ground wire on them. This here is our microphone inputs. These are kind of an omni socket, which means you can plug in a standard 1/4" microphone jack and also a standard XLR jack into each of these. And of course there's two mics, so there's two inputs there. And here is the power input. This is the on-off button here, and the only other input and output is on the very front of the unit, where there is a 1/8" and a 1/4" headphone socket. Let's look more closely at the different parts of the touch screen now. When you press the source button, it will show you the different sources available to you. There's only one available here. It's USB 1, the device plugged into the first USB port. Now, this is currently colored pink. You can see the pink color there underneath the icon. That's one of the things we can change over here in the My Settings menu by tapping on that My Settings icon or that My Settings button, and then going down to background color and pressing the button on this encoder. I can change the color to whatever I want on that. It's now the yellow color. Also in the My Settings menu, I can change the kinds of waveforms, so blue, RGB or 3-band for music on this USB. And also in here, I can change other settings by clicking load, and then settings that I've exported to this USB drive from my rekordbox software on my laptop can be imported into here. It's stuff like the screen brightness and other things that you might like to have set every time you plug your USB into any Pioneer DJ gear. It's advanced stuff, but it's good to know that it's there. So when you've got your music sorted and you've got your source selected, you'll want to have a look at that music. So now let's have a look at the browse button. So in the very top corner, we have a countdown timer. By tapping there, we can bring up this countdown timer, and here we can set either preset lengths of countdown or we can type in our own. And then when we're ready, we can hit start, and it will then count down from that set time at the top here, or to that set time on the top here. And when it's finished, or when it's getting close to finishing, it'll go red and it'll tell us that that is finished. And we can clear that on there as well. This can be useful for timing your DJ sets, for instance. Then here is where we can select the current deck out of the two decks which are controlled by the unit. Now this strip across the middle here is telling us all about our hot cue settings, although there is a way of displaying something else on there as well, which I'll tell you in a minute. Not only hot cues, but whatever you have set on the performance pads, it will tell you the status of that there. So moving across to the center of the screen, taking up most of the screen are these enlarged waveforms. This is where we can see cue points and loop points. I've got a little loop running in the middle here, hot cues that have been analyzed by your rekordbox software. Now you can change the color of the waveforms. I'll show you how to do that a little bit later on. You can also zoom in and out. I'll show you how to do that a little bit later on as well. So on the top here, were we recording, we would get the time that we've been recording for running up on here. You can record to a USB device at the unit, have something plugged into the second USB and record to that. We'll talk more about recording a little bit later on. So this is the info display. Just like in the top left hand corner, we could get this time display up. If we click the top right hand corner, we can get info up about the track that's currently selected on deck 1 or deck 2, and you can see we've got artwork and all kinds of other information about the track displaying there as well. So then this area here is the display for the beat effects that I showed you on the mixer earlier, and it basically tells you everything that the beat effects have got selected. So this is a selected effect, it's a transformer effect. Then this is the output. It's currently going to the master output, affecting the master output. We've got the BPM of the effect there, the time in milliseconds it takes the effect to cycle to get around one loop of whatever it's doing. This is the time as regards the track. So it's one beat of the track, which is 491 milliseconds for that effect to cycle. This is telling us whether the effect is quantized or not. So down here is the zoom and grid button, and this is either zooming in or out on the waveform. I told you I'd show you that. If it's set to zoom, or if it's set to grid, and you do that by holding it hard like that, we can then use this knob here to adjust the beat grid on the track, and holding it hard again will turn that off. Holding the status or beat effects buttons down will switch the strip along the bottom here that I showed you a second ago from the hot cue or whatever you've got selected on the performance pads display to the beat effects display, and here we can save various beat effects, and also we've got the X pad or cross pad, which is a way of controlling them. Again, we're going to get onto all of this in more detail later on. So down into these track areas here, which you saw me selecting here, track 1, track 2, down into these track areas, the number here, track 6, is telling me the number of the track. Every track has a number on your USB, and this is the number of the track from 1 to 99 that you've got loaded currently. Then we've got the mode, so I'll use my pen here. This is currently saying single, which means that the track will just play once, but if that's on continuous, then it's going to be a continuous playlist playing there. Again, we're going to talk a lot more about this later. It's just really to let you know what all these things are. This is the quantized value of the track itself as opposed to the quantized value of the effects. Quantize is the way the software makes everything line up nicely, even if your timing is a bit out as a DJ. Again, a lot more later. We're just getting used to everything that's on display here. So these little red lines here are telling us that this is currently set to play on the master output. That's what these are all about. And this is a deck. So there's only 2 decks here, so it's easy enough. This is always going to be set to deck 2. So down here we have auto hot cue and auto cue. These are both things that you can have set, which will make it easier when you're loading tracks to have them do exactly what you want them to do. And again, we'll talk about that in a little while. So moving from those to the name of the track, Boats is the name of this track, Beyond Beliefs is the name of that track. And then this here is the time that we are either elapsed, and my pen was changing that there. My pen was also doing something else I'll tell you about. So you can see I'm changing that to time left and time gone. And also along here, you can scrub through the track very quickly, so you can get to a different part in the track there very easily. This word here, master, is telling us that this is currently the master deck. It's the one that the other one is looking at when it wants to find out BPM information and so on. We'll talk more about what this means a little bit later on. Talking of BPM, 122, that is our BPM readout. And this number here, 0.00%, is our playback speed. If we've got the track speeded up or slowed down, it'll tell us there to the nearest 100th of a percent how much it's speeded up or slowed down. And the 10% above there is the total amount we're allowed to speed it up or slow it down depending on the current settings. Again, just to remind you, all we're doing is talking about the overall names of everything here, much more coming later. I've already introduced you to this full track waveform at the bottom, which is the whole track as opposed to the bit that we're zoomed in on a little bit nearer at the top. These little markers at the bottom of the overall waveform are showing us every 30 seconds throughout the track, and it's useful to have those because different length tracks obviously are going to have markers more gathered up or more spread out. And the hot cues that we've got set on the track will also show in here. Should we have hot cues set beforehand, they'll all be visible on that waveform as well as on the bigger ones. Now, one really nice thing on this unit is that it's got the in-jog displays the same as on the CDJ-3000, which gives you a lot of information. So to start with, you can see that in the middle of the jog is the artwork from the file that's loaded. If your file has artwork, it will show there. Now, moving around from the top corner, I'm going to press slip mode on. Slip mode is something we'll talk about later on, but this light here is now telling us that slip mode is switched on. Now, if I were to have a loop playing, so let me just use the loop buttons here to set a very quick loop on the track. You can now see that in the middle of the track, it's got a little loop symbol and the number 4, which is telling me that there is a 4-beat loop playing in that track, which is useful because it means that I can instantly see what I've set in my loop settings by looking at the middle of the waveform and not having to look anywhere else. Also on this display, there is an indicator here as to whether we're in vinyl mode or CDJ mode, which are the two modes for the jog wheels on this kind of device. Vinyl mode replicates what it feels like to play with vinyl, whereas CDJ mode is more like a legacy CD player, which behaves slightly differently. Again, it's just nice to see that bar across there and the light to tell you that that's on. And at the bottom, there's a couple of beat sync features. So the first one, if I press the sync button, will light up the word sync there, telling me that this has got sync switched on this deck for syncing up with other decks. And one of the decks has to be the master. And if I press the master button here, well, it will make this deck the master, and this is the one other thing's sync to. And the word master there is telling me that that is the case. So we've got slip mode, vinyl, sync and master all shown to us, as well as any looping controls and the artwork, all in the middle of the jog display. Now I'm starting to show you a lot of things here that we really got to dive deeper into. Not least, I want to talk a little bit more about getting music onto the unit. Just before we do that, I just want to cover basic operation of the touch screen, how to do the stuff that I've been showing you. And you actually see me do it anyway. The main way of interacting with the touch screen is by using the browse knob here. You turn the browse knob to move up and down through different things, and you press it to select something or to move to a lower level. Now when we're in a menu here, we can use the button on this to select whatever the menu options are. For instance, load that track to deck 2, we'll do that and started it playing there. Also in here we can use our finger. So for instance, if I wanted to load that track, I don't have to press the button. I can use the touch screen as well to select and load my track, and there we go. I've loaded that track onto deck 1 there. An important one to know here is the back button. So I could use back to move back a layer. So you see I'm on the track menu now. Let's go to the key menu. Pressing the button will move me forward in the key menu to here, and then pressing again will move me forward to here, and back will move me back through those things to get back to the main menu here so that I can select something else. Now, I spoke to you a minute ago about how to get music onto here using the source menu, but how do you get things to show in that source menu? In other words, what ways can we get music onto the unit? So I'm going to press the eject button now on the USB drive here, and I'm going to plug it into my laptop that I've got set up here. And in here is where we would prepare our music on the Rekordbox software. The DJ Music USB that I've plugged in here has been recognized by Rekordbox here, and using the sync manager, which is on the screen now, we can choose which playlists we want to move across into our device. Click this big button here, and then it will take a little while to put everything onto that device. When it's done, we can eject that device from the unit here, plug it back into here, and that's when we can select the source and see all our music. That's the main way you're meant to use this unit, but there are other ways, and one of the other ways is just simply plugging a cable from the computer into the unit and accessing the music in Rekordbox that way. So the cable you want plugs into the back of the DJ console, and this end plugs into our computer, Once you've done that, if you press the source button on your unit, you'll probably see this PC control, software control. Now this is actually not what we want. I'll talk to you about this one in a second. Instead, what you want to do is make sure your software is in the export mode at the top, which is the mode that you'd use to prepare your USBs in. And you should find at the bottom, you get this link appear here. And if I tap on the link button there and then re-hit source on here, I get, in this case, Phil's MacBook Pro, Phil's MPB. And this is where I can access everything that is on the computer as if I'd just plugged a USB drive into the USB here. So my tracks are all here. I can grab a track, I can load it onto a deck, and this is now going to work in exactly the same way that it would work if I were just DJing with a USB drive plugged in. And what's happening over on the main computer is that it's using the library in there, just showing me at the very bottom of the screen what track I've got loaded and what deck on, but nothing else. So the computers, you could close the computer, you know, have it completely out of your sight. It doesn't matter. So just think of Link as effectively using the library on your computer without having to go through that stuff of exporting it onto a drive and plugging it in and all that. So what about the other way that this works in Source, the software control? Well, that's a little bit different. This is about actually using the whole of the XDJ-RX3 as if it were a big DJ controller, as if it was simply a dumb box of buttons that you use to control DJ software. Now, of course, this is also DJ software, and you can buy DJ controllers for 200 or 300 that simply control this and that don't have all the clever stuff that your XDJ-RX3 has on it. So if we now go into performance mode, it will say, do you want to disconnect from Pro DJ Link? Yes, we do, because we're going to look at a different way of using it now. In performance mode, we get our 2 decks on the screen and we can load our tracks on here. We can do all this on the computer keyboard, of course, but we can also do this down on our unit. So now we have software control here. So if I tap into software control, it says load 1 or 2 here. And the reason we're going to tap these buttons is just to tell the unit that we want to use both decks as software control decks. So now this is set up as a major controller, you know, with screen and everything. You get screen feedback from the software and all that cool stuff. But it's essentially a big DJ controller, and the lights look different. Down here on the pads, for instance, they're all different colors, and because effectively you're controlling your software. And indeed, if we look at the software, you can see that that all this stuff that I'm doing is affecting the software. I'm playing with the pads at the moment, so you can see that happening on the software. So effectively what we've got here is a big controller now that's operating what we're doing on the screen as I do it on the unit here. So you have these 2 ways of controlling the music on your laptop. My advice to you is to forget the way I've just shown you, unless you really want to do that for a particular reason. It makes much more sense when you bought a unit that's designed to work standalone with all the standalone features to use that. And if you don't want to bother exporting to a USB drive, then just have that single cable, go into link mode and DJ away there. It's going to feel much more like DJing on other Pioneer standalone gear, for instance. So have a good reason for using it as a software controller. It could be that you're used to using software controllers and you've just been asked to DJ on an XDJ-RX3 and you're going to go back to using software controllers. So then, for instance, that way of doing it might make sense. Now, as I said, the way you're likely to use this nearly all the time is using a USB drive. So let's have a closer look at this area here. We have our 2 USB sockets, which have these little protective covers on. And we have 2 USB stop buttons. And by long holding one of these buttons, you will turn off the light that's above and allow you to take the drive out safely. You shouldn't just pull the drive out, and certainly when these are flashing, you shouldn't pull the drive out. So I'll plug a drive in now to this one here. The light flashes, which means that the drive is currently being read, and then it goes solid. The drive is now kind of locked in. We don't want to pull this out, and again, when that's flashing, we certainly don't want to pull this out. To take the drive out, hold your hand down on there until it stops flashing and then pull. It's a little bit like waiting for the drive to say safe to take out when you're unplugging one from a computer. And there have been instances of people yanking these out and the whole drive is corrupt and they can't carry on DJing. So do make sure you're not one of those people. 2 of them. And then here we have the master record and the track mark buttons. I'll talk a little bit more about these later on when we talk about recording your DJ sets. So your tracks are loaded. How do you choose them? How do you select tracks? Let's have a look at that. It's really simple. We've already talked about the touch screen. The browse button is where you're going to be doing a lot of your sorting. There's a few other buttons here which will help you. Tag list is tracks you've tagged. We'll talk about that in a while. Playlist will take you to your playlists. Search gives you a keyboard so you can search for tracks. And while we're here, menu will give you menu items based upon the thing that you're currently on. So in this instance, we're in search. So it's giving us a couple of search criteria here that we can dive into. Then we have the back button. I've shown you that in operation already. To go back, tag, track and remove adds or deletes tracks from the tag list. I showed you the tag button a second ago. We'll talk about that, as I say, in a minute. You've already seen the rotary selector. Track filter edit lets us narrow down the tracks we're looking at by information that we set, like BPM and key and so on. Again, talk about that in a bit. And you've seen the load 1 and 2 buttons already. We'll talk about shortcut in a second as well. So that's the controls we have around here. And put simply, the way to select a track is to press that browse button, go into wherever you want to select a track from, and then choose your track. You can use your finger to move up and down, you can use this to move up and down and load it. We looked at that a little while ago, but there's more that we can do here as well. So for instance, one of the things we can do is use the menu button to sort. So in this instance, in this playlist, we're currently sorted by the default, which is the title, but I might want to sort by artist instead. So now this playlist is sorted by artist, and you can see that we've got the artist names here, all sorted out in alphabetical order, but we are also seeing the track title as well, which is a useful thing. And there's other options there as well for sorting: album, BPM, rating, key. It's useful to know that because if you're in a big playlist, it's easy to then sort the playlist in a way that works for you. So you can select the item in the two ways I just showed you, like this or like this. They both work. You're going to find a way that works for you. So what if I just want to search for a track? I know the name of the track, but I've got no idea what playlist it's in. That is simple stuff. Use the search button and type the name. So there's a track I want to see called Pop Shock, P-O-P. Look, it's instantly found it. It was iterating as I went. I didn't even have to get to typing the second word. Pop was enough. And now I can hit the load button to load it onto a deck. And there we go. That track is now loaded up here and ready for me to play. There are extra parameters I can use as well by pressing the menu button. I can search by tracks that include one thing and something else. And also I can narrow it down, for instance, by tracks that only contain the words I've typed in the track title. But for the size of playlists that most people use, you're very rarely going to find yourself needing to use these search criteria. Good to know they're there though. So let me show you another cool trick. This is especially useful if you've got big playlists. If you're in a view, such as the default view, where everything is organized by alphabetical order, by holding down this button here, you can then go through by letter. So for instance, I started at A and I'm moving through by letter here, you see, and it tells you the letter in the middle of the screen, and then it jumps to the first track that has that letter. Now, if you happen to be in a view that doesn't list in that way, then you're going to jump by page when you do that. So it just takes you to the next page, the next page, the next page in your tunes. And that's another way of quickly moving through, as opposed to having to move through track by track like this. Just two simple ways of quickly navigating lists that might be a bit bigger than others, and therefore it's useful to be able to jump through them in those ways. So here's a cool way of quickly finding another track that's likely to work with the one you've got playing. I've got a track playing here on the first deck. I'll click the info button on the touch screen, top right, which I showed you earlier, and it shows me the info for this particular track, and it's got various criteria here. So for instance, if I wanted to find other tracks in a similar key, I can go down to the key column, and then from there I can just click and it will immediately jump me to the search that gives me the same key or compatible keys with the one that's currently playing. But also in this view, in this info view, another cool thing you can do is go down to the rating column, and then by holding your hand on the encoder, you can actually change that rating on the fly. So if you use that rating to decide whether you like or don't like a track, or indeed whether the track's, really banging dance floor filler or more like a warm-up, well, you can set that rating there, and then when you get back to your DJ software with your USB and plug it in, you can click refresh, and along with any other changes you've made in the software to your library, that will all go back to your main library. So any changes you make here won't be lost, and they'll be carried over for next time. It's a really cool feature. By hitting the Q link button, you can tap on the waveforms of any track before you've loaded it to listen to it by holding your finger on the waveform, and then it will play in your headphones as if you'd queued it, but it's not even loaded to a deck. And the best bit about this is, well, you can move through the track like this, But you can even do it on a track that is currently playing on a deck. So not only is it a good way of checking whether you want to play something without bothering to load it, but also if you're not sure how a track ends, you've loaded it and you think, forgotten how this one ends, you can have a quick listen that way. It's a really cool feature. For completion's sake, let's cover off the 3 ways to load a track. So you can tap the touch screen if that works for you, like this. You can press the load 1 or load 2 buttons here to load a track that way, or you can press this button here to get to the track menu, and from there you have some options, 2 of which are load to deck 1 and load to deck 2. The XDJ-RX3 will keep a list of everything you play in a history folder or file or playlist, and the way it does that is waiting for a minute and then adding it to that list. So in other words, if you're quickly loading tracks and listening to them and so on, they won't show. It'll only show tracks that you've played for more than a minute, and it'll keep them in order for you. It's a really nice feature to have because you can look back at playlists that you've played and they're stored on your USB device. So each USB will have a list of the history of tracks that have been played off it on Pioneer DJ gear. To get to the history list, you tap Browse and then tap History down here. And there's only one history list with 1 track on here because that's all I've done on this particular demo. And if you don't want to keep the history anymore for whatever reason, you can tap the menu and then you can delete either that individual history list or you can delete all the history lists. Okay, and your history list is clear. I spoke to you about the tag list, which you might also think of as a prepare crate or pulling your record halfway out of the record box. You know, if you ever use vinyl, you'd go through and you'd pull out a few tracks that you knew you wanted to play next. Well, there's a feature that lets you do that on here. It's called the tag list. So I'm in a playlist here, and let's say I'm looking through this and I'm saying, you know, I want to play that one soon. Well, I'll go to it and I'll tap tag track here. And once I've done that, that is now tagged, and I can move through, do it with a few more. And there's a tiny little tick here which is showing that it's been added to the tag list. Few more, and then by tapping the tag list button here, all the tracks that are in my tag list are now showing here, and I can quickly get to them. And if I want to remove them from the tag list, then when I'm in that tag list, I can hold the tag button on a track that I don't want anymore and it will remove it so that it's gone. You can't have a track in the tag list more than once, and you can have a maximum of 100 tracks in there per USB drive. You don't have to be in the tag list to remove one. The tag list tracks are ticked, as I said in here, and if you're in here, you can do it by just tapping them in there and it'll remove the tick as well. You can even do it while you're playing a track. Just tap and hold tag and it will remove it from the tag list. And finally on tag list, if you want to remove everything from the tag list at the same time, then you press the menu button to get you the list menu, go to tag list menu, and from here you can remove all tracks. And you can also turn the tag list into a playlist from here as well. Let's remove them all. There we go. Now, playlists are a great way of organising your music, preparing it ahead of time in Rekordbox, and as we've seen, there are ways of making playlists on the unit as well. But how do we get to them? How do we access them? How do we work with them? So there's a couple of ways of getting to your playlists. The first way, the most obvious way really, is pressing the playlist button at the top here, which gets to the playlist window. We can then select the playlist that we want and click on it. But the other way of getting to your playlists, if we're in a different window like here, is to tap playlist on the side here. Both ways will get you to exactly the same place. Once we're there, we can choose the playlist that we want here by flicking through it. You can see we're getting a preview down here. It's my early doors playlist here. You're very familiar with this view, so you get all the usual controls here. For instance, we can tap on menu and we can choose how we're going to sort them out. So if I want to sort them out by artist, we get this familiar artist view here. A nice thing you can do in playlists is mark tracks as played or not. So I can tap the menu button here and go to play state, and I can mark this current track as played or unplayed. So it's now marked as played, and you can see it's been grayed out. So it's a nice way of controlling our list with regards to what we have and haven't played so far in the night. Now you can delete whole playlists by pressing the menu button when you're in a playlist and clicking delete there. I'm going to cancel that. You can even delete all your playlists from there if you want. You can also add playlists to the playlist banks down here. Now let's say I had 20 playlists down here and I wanted my 4 most commonly used playlists to be registered here. By going to a playlist, so for instance I might want early doors on bank 1 and I might want peak time on bank 2 and so on. I can do that and select them there, and that makes it easier to get back to these playlists when we're elsewhere. We go to our playlists, and while we're in one playlist, we have the ability to quickly go to our playlist banks and switch to another one here without having to then go and browse through all the playlists that, as I say, you might have lots and lots of them, and that's an easy way of doing that. You can delete the banks as well by hitting the delete button here and then pressing the bank that you want to get rid of at the top. You now have all you need to get your music onto the unit and manipulate that music and get your tracks loaded and find the next tracks you want to play. Let's now take a closer look at the decks. We just very quickly brushed over the decks earlier. Now it's time to dive in deeper. So we'll look at the left-hand deck. They're both very, very similar. In fact, they're both identical. And I'm going to go through all the buttons, knobs, and what they are called, and then we'll look in more detail at all of these things. So to start with, at the top here, we have the loop area with our loop in and 4-beat and in adjust button here, and our loop out and out adjust button here, and our reloop and exit button here. Moving across to here, this is Pioneer DJ's memory cue system, which is different to hot cues and unique to Pioneer DJ. We'll be talking more about this shortly, as with all of these features, but in brief, we have our cue loop buttons here, which are also our half and double loop buttons for here. That's why they're called cue and loop. Also, we have delete and memory. This is for the cue system as well. So moving down to here, this is our Quantize button, and then from here to the left, this is the slip button. We looked at this a little bit earlier because it turns on the slip on the screen on the middle. All of this stuff to be talked about very, very shortly. Our direction button is here, which alters the direction of play. It lights up when it's in reverse mode. It'll play the deck backwards basically, and then switches off when you're back into forwards mode. We'll listen to that, and we'll also look at using it with the slip button shortly. So here's our track search buttons. These will jump to the beginning and end of the track, and these are our search buttons which will search within the track. The shift button will give us lots of extra features. For instance, we've already looked at a couple of them. The loop, half and double, the in and out adjust up here, and anything that's got something written underneath it can be selected by holding the shift button and then pressing that button. These are our master transport buttons, which are on all Pioneer DJ gear, of course. Our cue button, we'll talk about how cue is used shortly, and our master play pause button, which does exactly what it says, plays and pauses the track. So moving over to here, we had a little look at these earlier, again, because we were looking at the screen, the sync and the master button, which light up sync and master in the middle here, and they're used for sync features. Then we have our tempo button here, and the tempo button will select how far the tempo control will slow or speed the track up or down from 0 or from true speed, and you get a choice of plus or minus 6, 10, 16 and wide, which is an awful lot there. The master tempo button decides that when you're moving this, whether it also affects the pitch. So you can have the track slow down as it would if it was a record, and and speed up at the same time as the pitch going down and the pitch going up, or you can select master tempo, and when that's on, the actual pitch will stay the same even though the tempo is going up and down, and this can be useful for key mixing and so on. We'll demo that and talk a little bit more about it later. And the final control is the one you're seeing me use here, which is the tempo slider, which does what I explained. There is a couple of other features here I want to just talk about: the vinyl speed adjust and the jog adjust here. The jog adjust decides whether the jog wheel is very loose or very hard to turn. And that's useful for deciding how you like it set for scratching, for instance. And vinyl speed adjust decides whether a setting, which I'm going to show you a little bit later, is switched on or off. That setting being how quickly the track stops playing when you hit stop. That's stopping playing immediately, which you can see by the ring here. But when that's on, when I hit stop, it's taking a long time to slow down and stop. I'll show you how to change how long it takes later, but this decides whether it's on or off. And you're effectively simulating turning on or off a turntable with vinyl on it. So time to cover some basic playback functions on the unit. So our play pause button does exactly what you would expect. It plays and pauses the track for each touch. Now, I was talking earlier about the vinyl speed adjust button. When that's turned on, it will slow down and start based upon some settings which we'll talk about shortly to give that vinyl feel. But when that's turned off, we have the instant start and stop that you're hearing here. Now you can just see my waveform on the shot I've got for you here. If I touch the waveform while it's paused, I can move through the track to any point I want and then start and stop. If I try and do it when it's playing, it won't let me do it. It says needle lock on the screen and it won't do a thing. That can be changed. So if you do want to be able to do that while you're playing the track, then you can set that in the settings, which we're going to look at towards the end of this video. But it's useful to know you've got that there, certainly when you're paused, to quickly jump through a track. There are other ways of jumping through the track though, which we're going to look at in a second. First though, I want to show you the reverse button. We talked about this a second ago. We'll play the track backwards from the point that it was at when you hit that button. Now there are other ways of navigating through the track. So these buttons here will search us either through the playing track, backwards and forwards, or we can go to the beginning of the track by pressing this, or we can go to the next track by pressing this one in the playlist. So these are good for jumping through the playlist. These are good for jumping through the track that's currently playing. If you're currently paused, then this will move very, like frame by frame, very, very gently through the track where you currently are. If you just want to move, instead of nudging the jog wheel very, very slightly to move backwards and forwards, you can use these buttons here. It's called frame search in order to do that. So if you want to slow and speed the track up and down, back to the tempo control we were talking about, I'll demo this for you now. Turn master tempo off. It slows the track down in a very natural vinyl style way. Depending upon what's set here, this button here will take us through various settings that get more and more extreme, and then cycle back to the lowest one. But if we have this set to somewhere like that with this on, even though it slows down the same amount and speeds up the same amount, the pitch stays the same. So on this setting here, without that on, pitch is getting really high and really low, but with that on, the pitch is staying the same. That's called master tempo, and it's useful for key mixing. So you know how to load tracks up and you know how to play tracks. One of the other things you're going to want to do very early on is record your sets, right? So let's cover that off now. You're going to need a separate USB. You can't record onto the same USB drive that is playing your music. So you're going to need a second USB, and the second USB gets inserted into the USB slot next to the first one. It will flash and then you are ready to go. So you're going to hit the master record button here and then start your track playing. We're now recording the set. You get about 90 minutes per gigabyte of space that you have on a USB device here. A really nice feature of this is the track mark button. When you press the track mark button, it splits the recording into a new file. It starts a new file recording at the point that you press it. So this is useful if you've mixed another track in. Press that button, this flashes to tell you that's happened, and you're getting a separate recording from that point on. So you can put all those recordings together to give you the whole set, but also you can then use that if you are wanting to index this set for whatever reason later on. You know exactly where the track's changed to save you having to listen through and figure all that out later. So let's take a closer look at the operation of the Jogwheel. So we've already talked about the Jogwheel display. The Jogwheel has two distinct parts. The top part is metal, and this part lets you scratch as if it were a record when the track's actually playing. Now the edge of the Jogwheel is different. The edge of the Jogwheel lets you nudge or slowly speed up and slow down the track as it's playing. So you get this vinyl effect here, and you get this nudging effect here. Now when the track is paused, you get the vinyl effect wherever you touch the Jogwheel. So that difference only kicks in when the track's playing, and the difference only kicks in when the vinyl button is pressed, because when the vinyl button is not pressed, you get the CD like slowing and speeding up, like the Jogwheels on a CDJ from years ago that didn't have this vinyl feature. So some DJs prefer this way of doing it, especially if you don't want to scratch. Now, if you pause in vinyl mode, it goes still. But if you pause in CDJ mode, it pauses by repeating the current frame of music that it was playing. And so, for instance, I'm there just before that beat now. And again, some DJs prefer this way of working, they prefer that. But if you hear this strange noise when you pause and think there's something wrong, there isn't, you're just not in the correct mode. So switch to vinyl mode and that will disappear. And now a function that not many people know about, if you hold down the search and then move the jogwheel, it searches a lot more quickly through your track than if you just use the jogwheel, which can be a nicer way of jumping quickly through the waveform than just pausing it and pressing the waveform, for instance, as an easy way of getting to somewhere far away in your track from where you currently are. Let's go back to that vinyl speed adjust button. I want to show you how to use that, and in doing so, I'm going to introduce you to two things you haven't seen yet, but we will be seeing a lot more of. The utility menu button brings up a special settings menu so that we can change a lot of stuff about the system, and also the shortcut button gets us to lots of the changes that we're most likely to want to make. So both of those things come into play now. So just as a reminder, I'm starting and stopping the track, and we are hearing the music stop instantly when I press stop. And when I press vinyl speed adjust on, it's taking a while to stop. Starting instantly, but it's taking a while to stop. And actually, if I touch the top of the jogwheel, it's the same effect. Gives that kind of vinyl speed. So, what do we do to get this to work how we want it to? So, hold down the menu button at the top, and you get the utility settings here. And I'm going to scroll down through all these settings to the one that's called vinyl speed adjust and touch on that. Now it currently says touch, but I can set it to touch, to release, or to touch and release. And these are the settings that decide whether this vinyl speed adjust sound happens when we start the track playing, when we stop the track playing, or both. So touch adjusts the speed at which the playback slows down and stops, and release is the speed at which it starts, and touch and release will do both. Most people will have that set to touch because you want the track to speed up instantly when you hit play, and you want it to slow down possibly with a kind of vinyl feel when you've got the button switched on when you press stop. So most people will leave that set to touch. But how do you adjust how quickly that, in this instance, slows down when you press the button? Well, this is where the shortcuts menu comes in. So by tapping on shortcut here, we get this screen here that we haven't talked about yet. And the part that interests us is vinyl speed adjust here. This is deciding how quickly the track stops when I hit that button. So this is currently saying it's on and it's off. We know that, but here's our speed adjustment. This knob here is adjusted like this. So if we are there, for instance, and we turn this on, it's stopping almost instantly. If we're there, it's taking a little bit more time. If we're there, a little bit more time. And if we're there, it's taking quite a long time to stop. Let's look at how the XDJ-RX3 handles cue points. So we have the cue button here, and this is what we use to set a cue when the track is paused. So for instance, were I to want a cue right there at the beginning of the track, I can tap this, and the little triangle that's appeared here is telling me that that is now set as a cue. Now, if I want to find exactly where that cue point should be, and I'm in the CDJ mode by turning vinyl mode off there, then I can use these search buttons to move very, very granularly, about half a frame at a time, to find the exact point before I press that button to do that. If I'm in vinyl mode, I can use the jogwheel to do the same thing. So when you're happy with your cue, you hit the cue button, and now that cue point is set. So if you want to set a cue when you're actually playing the track, so I want to set a cue at this beat coming up here, I'm going to press this button here. I'll stop the track there, move back a little bit so you can see at the top here, it's now set that temporary cue there with this little triangle. So that's another way of doing it, because this button isn't going to do it when the track's playing, because when the track's playing, this button is going to jump back to that cue. It's gone back to that cue that I just set. And it sits and waits for you to do something else. Now, if you want to do what Pioneer DJ calls cue sample, which imagine that the cue point is a sample, the music straight after the cue point is a little sample. So by holding this down, you kind of play that sample back. And so on. And if you want that to continue playing from the point that you have reached when you do this, you just tap the play button afterwards. So if you want that to carry on playing, tap the play button, take your hands off, and that's going to carry on playing. Now you can save these cues that you set with the cue button. The way you do that is by setting a cue. So I've got a cue here that I've just set at the beginning of this drop. And I'm going to press the memory button. And then it says memory USB 1 on there. Now let's just set one at the, let's just move forward to the beginning of the next drop. And let's set one there. So again, I'm going to go there and I'm going to press the cue button. So there's a cue point there. And then I'm going to press memory. It says memory USB 1. So now I have two set, one at the beginning of the first drop and one at the beginning of the second drop. And I can cycle between them by using these two arrow buttons. I'm now at the beginning of the first drop, down there near the beginning of the track, and I'm now at the beginning of the second drop. Now let's say I want to add a cue point now that is, say, at the beginning of the breakdown here. There. Again, I can just press the cue button and I can press memory. It says memory USB. Now, even though I set those in a certain order, the way these work is it will always have them in chronological order for you. So I can now move between the one that's at the beginning of the first drop, the one that's at the beginning of the breakdown, which I actually added last, and the one that's at the end. So it's put them in chronological order. Now you can check that by going to the track in here. So here's my track in the browse menu and tapping on this button here and going to cue loop list. And here you can see that the beginning of the track is at 0000, and then we've got cues at 132, 233, and 304. And you can actually label the cues with what they are. Breakdown, drop, second drop, whatever. But you can't do that on this unit, even though the unit does have a QWERTY keyboard built in that we saw for searching. You have to do that on rekordbox ahead of time. And you can set all of these for all your tracks on rekordbox ahead of time as well. You don't have to do it on the unit. They are not really good for performance, even though when you load the track back, all your cues come in with the track. Because when you're going through them, it's always just going to stop and wait there. So you can't kind of like jump between the cues. And because they're sequential, you can't easily jump from Q1 to Q4. That's what the hot cues are for, which we'll look at later. Some people use these, some people don't. They are only on Pioneer DJ gear. No other DJ system has something like memory cue. If you want to set a part of the track looping, in other words, playing repeatedly, we press this button here. And then that one there, when we're ready to loop it, and that section of the track is now looping, as you can see. I didn't get that quite right, did I? So to adjust the beginning or end points of the loop, you hold down this button for the beginning and that button for the end point, and then you turn the jog wheel. You can also use the search buttons, but the jog wheel I find easier. So hold this down. That sounds all right to me. And that is now done. Press it again and we're out of there. To get out of the loop completely, press the exit here and we're gone. Loop's now vanished. Now if we want to set a 4-beat loop automatically without having to get that timing correct, just hold down the first button. And a 4-beat loop is automatically set for you after half a second or so without you needing to do anything else. Now, if you want to half or double the length of that loop, we can use these two buttons here to do that. Press the left-hand one to halve the length of it. And again. And the other direction will double that loop length for you. Now if you want to get to the beginning of a loop that's playing, this loop's back to the beginning now and continuing, but you want to get right back to the beginning of a loop that's playing, you can hold down the shift button, which is slightly off camera at the moment, down here in the right hand side, and then tap this button here, and that'll take you right back to the beginning as you saw happen there. Now it is possible to have what's called an active loop, and an active loop is a loop where the track reaches it and it automatically loops forever. These can be really useful if you've got a track that ends quite quickly but there's a few beats at the end, because you can set an automatic loop or an active loop at the end to just kick in as soon as the track reaches there, and it gives you beats. The track doesn't end and you've got something to mix over, but you can't set that on the unit itself. You have to set those active loops in the Rekordbox software before you export the tracks, and then when you load the track, that active loop will exist in the track. What if I want to save this loop that I've got? Well, you've seen it before. We just tap the memory button and the memory USB will tell us it's saved. And then to check that, get to your track, tap the button, and then you'll see this menu here, go to cues and loops. And at the bottom here, we can see I've got a new 16-beat loop that I've set that's there. And I can now access that in exactly the same way that I access the cues, by using the left and right arrow cue and loop buttons to move around the track to get to that, and it will be put in the right place in the hierarchy as well. So in that way you can save loops as well as cue points, memory loops as well as memory cues. These are the Quantize buttons next to the slip button, which we'll look at next, at the top left hand part of the deck. And Quantize is a useful button if your timing is a little bit off, because if you turn these on when you set hot cues or when you trigger loops or when you use the cue button here, it's going to snap the action you just did to the nearest beat. And what that means is that it just tidies up your timing. If you're messing around with cues or you're laying down cues or you're looping things, it means it's going to make that happen bang on the beat, even though you might happen to trigger the button a little bit before the beat or a little bit after the beat. It's a nice way of making you sound a little bit tighter in your mixing than maybe you would be otherwise. But conversely, if you are DJing and you do something and you feel it didn't happen when you wanted it to, then maybe you want to try turning the Quantize button off again in order to get that immediate feeling back. And it's quite often vinyl DJs who are used to dealing with their own imperfections that think, hang on, what's going on here? But it's very useful, especially when you're live remixing, because again, it just tidies everything up. Later on, I'll show you a way of making sure that that is snapping to the nearest value that works for you. It could be a beat, could be a half beat, could be a quarter beat, and there's a way of adjusting that, so we'll move on to that later. So also in this area is the slip function. The slip function is this button here. Now slip is something you want to definitely be sure that you know it's switched on, because it can really throw you otherwise. But slip will allow whatever the track was doing before you started to do something, which I'll tell you in a minute, to not affect the play position. So it's easy, much easier to show you this. So if I hit play on this track now and I pause, watch the waveform. You notice it's jumping when I start it again. That's because it's jumping to a point in the track that it would have been in if I hadn't pressed pause. Now I can scratch as well. You hear how that's respecting the beat underneath? And again, watch the waveform, it's jumping back to where it would have been otherwise. If I was doing this without slip on, I'm losing the timing. But with slip on, it's maintaining that timing. I can use reverse as well. So here, for instance, you hear how it's maintaining that timing underneath? I could set a hot cue somewhere, hot cue there. And you hear how it's maintaining the timing underneath? And a nice way of showing you this is we've got a breakdown coming up. Let me do a little reverse on the deck. See the breakdown coming up here? And you notice that when I took my hand off the jog, it jumped to the end of the breakdown, even though I'd stopped it before we got to the end of the breakdown and started playing it backwards. This again is a really useful tool if you want to just try a few baby scratches, or you want to use the reverse button to there's a swear word coming up, you hit reverse, it plays backwards for a bit, you take your hand off reverse, it's jumped past the swear word. That's sometimes called sensor. There is no sensor control on this unit, but all you need to do is hit slip and reverse and you get exactly the same thing. And just generally, if you've got 2 tracks playing and you're messing with one, it'll keep the mix nice and tight. So taken together, slip and quantize are 2 really good controls for tightening up your mixing and allowing you to maybe do things which you wouldn't feel confident doing otherwise, because you don't want to get your timing a bit wrong and to mess up a beat mix. So let's look at beat sync. Beat sync gets your tracks playing at the same speed or tempo. So this track is at 130 beats per minute. It says 130 BPM there, and this one's at 120. So this one's playing away there now. And if I try and mix this one in to that one, because they're different BPMs, it sounds like the classic train crash. And that is what sync fixes for us. So this time, let's get them both back to the beginning and let's press the sync button on here and start this one playing. Now this is now playing and it's become the master, and this means that this is the one that anything else you turn on with sync is going to snap to. In other words, whatever the BPM is on here, 120, is what the BPM is going to turn into on other stuff. So let's start another track playing. Hey, there's the new track, there's the old one, and they're in perfect time. And that's because the sync button is turned on both, and this deck here now is at 120 to match this one here. Doesn't matter what the tempo faders are set to, all that matters is that they are synced. And the one that has master written on it is the one which is going to be synced to from the other deck. So what normally happens is that you're playing deck to deck to deck, and as soon as you finish on one, the one that's still playing becomes the master, you load something else, that syncs to that one, then this one becomes the master, and so on. And that way you get a clear beat mix going on all the time without you having to ever touch the tempo faders. Now if you do need to get tempo back, then you have to take the fader and you have to move it to where it would have been if the BPM hadn't been changed automatically. So let's turn sync off here. So now sync's turned off. These are now both set to 120 BPM, but this one here, it says move tempo slider to current BPM. And if I do that, the current BPM is there. See how that took over there when I got down to the BPM that it's currently set to? And this one here was already at that BPM because that was the master. So the lesson here is that if you find that your tempo faders aren't working after you've been syncing, it's because you've got to move it to the current tempo. And the reason for that is that if it wasn't like that, as soon as you touch the tempo fader, the deck would immediately jump, and it could be jumping like 10 BPMs or something. So you having to go to the correct BPM is called, we call it soft takeover, and it's a soft landing or a soft takeoff, so that when you do take control again, everything sounds stable, and then you're able to gradually adjust the tempo rather than, as I said, having a big jump in tempo. Now, instant doubles is a feature that lets you take what's playing on one deck and immediately put it onto the other deck at the same speed and in the same place. In other words, you're getting another copy or a double of what's going on deck one. So I've got 2 different tracks loaded up here now, and let's just say I'm mixing with these, and then I want to instant double this track onto this deck. So to do that, you hold down on the sync button for the deck that you want the new track to go to. So holding down on there, I've now got 2 copies of that track playing together. You can hear that phasing effect as they kind of both play through the speaker at the same time. So why would you want to do this? Well, DJs do this so that they can then do scratching effects or do crossfader effects. I could pause this one for half a beat. Quite often see DJs doing that, they call it doubling. And other effects you might want to then use that as the basis for a little scratch transition or something. Or you might just want to double a track up so that you can make it longer, get it back to the beginning while one track's still playing or whatever. But there's an easy way there of getting whatever's playing on one deck onto another by holding down the sync button for a little while. Now, there is a beat grid on these tracks. You can see it on the tracks. It's what the lines do here, and the lines are what cause all these features to work that we've been talking about. So for instance, you can't do beat sync and you can't do quantize without having a beat grid on your tracks, which is analyzed in your software before you put the tracks onto a USB drive. Again, this is why it's a good idea to do everything in rekordbox, get all your tracks ready before, and don't just try and play with MP3s on this unit without doing that work. But there is a way of adjusting the beat grids on your tracks if you realize that they're a little bit out when you come to play. So in order to do that, you select the deck that's got the track on that you want to do the beat grid adjustment on. So I'm selecting deck 1 here, and then hold down the rotary. And then it goes into beat grid mode. This flashes and you get a few extra controls here. The controls, we've got a snap grid cue here, we've got a half and a half here and a reset. So let's talk about what these things do. So the first thing we can do is adjust this grid, and remember the grid is these lines, so the little lines above and below, but also it's this big line here that's marking every 4 beats or every bar. So this is a bar, this is a bar. And we can adjust this whole thing in fine detail by turning this knob. So you can see that these are moving away from the beats here. You see this? And the more we turn it, the faster we turn it, the more they move. So we can use this to visually line it up with the beats. And also, if we can just see that it's a beat or half a beat out, we can use the grid minus and plus half buttons here. You see it's moving now the grid through the track like this. Or alternatively, if we put a cue point on what we know is the first beat of a bar, we can click snap grid cue, and then it snaps the grid to that cue point. So it's just a really fast way of tidying your grids up. When you're finished, you hold down this knob here again until it stops flashing, and that's done. You can't adjust the grid in any more detail than that. You can't change the BPM and that kind of thing from here. You can just do the basics. But often the problem with the grid is that it's been just analysed correctly, but the first beat's in the wrong place, or it's very slightly out because it's got a strange kick drum that kind of comes in twice or whatever. And so it just needs a very, very little fine tweak, or maybe the beginning of the bar moving to a new point. So in the majority of cases, it's possible to adjust your beat grid right there on the unit, and it's done. Next time you put the USB into your main computer, that beat grid adjustment will go back to the main copy, and then you don't have to do it again. All right, it's time to move down to the performance pads and talk through all the clever things you can do down here. First, I want to give you a few button definitions. You've got the shift button here, which you're going to see is useful in a second. We have these selector buttons here, which choose what the 8 pads do. So this one here has got hot cue on it. This one here has got beat loop. This one here has got slip loop, and this one here has got beat jump. And underneath them, printed onto the decal, is gate cue, beat loop 2, release effects, and beat jump 2. Shift, and that will switch to that function. So these are the functions underneath I'm switching to now. Just pressing these buttons will switch to the button function written on the button itself. And the buttons themselves are backlit with different colors depending upon what you're doing. Let's start by talking about hot cue. So a hot cue, and you've seen me using these already, gives you a cue point in the song that you can jump back to and play from. There's my hot cue there at the beginning of the song. If I want to set a new one, I can tap on it. At the next point I want a hot cue setting. There's another one set now in the song, and this is going to jump back to that one. This is going to jump back to the one at the beginning of the song, and you can set up to 8 of these. Now if you've got a loop playing at the time that you hit a hot cue, it sets a cue loop, and you can see that this is looping now, and it's orange instead of green to give you the indication that you've set a loop there. And again, you can jump back to these, and these are going to be available when you load the track again from scratch, so you don't have to reset these every time. They'll stay with the track. That's one of the cool things about hot cues. Now you can't set a hot cue on the cue points that are already set, but it's easy enough to delete them, and that's where the shift button comes in again. You hold down shift and press a hot cue, it clears, there's no light on it anymore, and that's now free to be set for another cue point. Now we've talked about this briefly before, but when you touch that cue button, the track plays. And you might not want that. I just touched cue number 2 there. You might not want that to happen. So that's what gate cue is underneath. If you press shift and hot cue, you get the same hot cues that you've had set, but this time it doesn't start playing. And again, you have to press the play button once it started playing in order to make that happen. And again, this is something that different DJs like. It's just a preference thing, but you have both of those functions here, which isn't on a lot of the gear, but it is on the XDJ-RX3. It's a nice function in there if you're used to doing it in that other way. Okay, so moving on. The next function is beat loop. So beat loop will loop the currently playing track depending upon the pad that you press on the beat, nice and clean. So for instance, if I press the first pad, that's a quarter beat loop. The next pad will double that to a half beat loop. And the next pad to a 1 beat. You can see it on the screen as well. 2 beat. And it's going to double it all the way up to 4 beats, 8, 16 and 32. And you can jump between them as well. So I can go from 32 down to half. And to press it again to get out of that. Now, if you want to use a slightly more experimental set of beat loops, holding down shift and pressing it takes you into beat loop 2 mode. Now this starts on a 3/4 beat. Then it goes up to 1 beat, 1.5 beats, 3, 5, 6, 7 and 9. And this can be useful if you want to, for instance, echo out a little bit of vocal and just have the vocal slightly in a different time to what's going on the main beat on the other track. That could be one use for it. It's a kind of triplet pattern. Some of these patterns give you something that's a little bit more creative than just having something echoing as a fraction of or a multiple of whole beats going on the other deck or in the kind of body clock that's ticking away in your head. So you've got 2 sets there. And again, holding down shift will give you the second set. Just pressing beat loop will give you the first set. So the next function is slip loop. Now this is like the loop that we just looked at, the beat loop, but imagine you had the slip button on as well. So and you can hear that track playing away underneath. And you can actually see it on the waveform in the same way that you can with slip mode. You can see the track playing where it should be on the inside line and the loop going on the white line. That's a 2 beat, 1 beat. These are all regular. And then you've got these 2 here that are coloured differently. That's a 3rd beat loop or a triplet loop and a 3/4 beat loop, which again can just give you an effect that's slightly different, and they're coloured differently just to stop you accidentally hitting them. But the big thing with this is you've got to just imagine the slip button is turned on and the track's continuing to move through where it would have been had you not pressed these buttons. That's the big difference between slip loop and beat loop, apart from the slightly different values that they've set here. They've set values here that they think are going to be most useful to you when you're DJing with slip loop and adding a little bit of extra over the top of the currently playing track. Now the second function on the slip loop button is release effects. To get to that, hold down shift and press the button again, or you can cycle between the 2 things on each button by pressing the button, and that works for all of them as well. So there's another way of moving between them. Release effects are effects which work on the currently playing track depending upon how long you keep your finger on the button. So we've got 8 of them. Let's have a listen to them. We've got a vinyl break, which stops the track with that classic vinyl break sound. We've got a short spin back, same as doing that, but you've got it on a button. We've got a echo out, a mute, which is the same as moving the crossfader or the up faders, but you've got it on a button there. A long vinyl break, that classic end of night sound, and a really long backspin. Again, equivalent to doing something like that, but you've got it on a button. We've got a build up. This is one of my favourites. Just gives you that classic build up all on one button. And then ducking will duck out the sound rhythmically just after when you press the button. So if I want to hear that clap, if I want to get rid of that, just before the clap I can hold this button down. And you can hear it's pretty much taken that out of the mix. I want to get rid of the kick drum. And you can hear that's done that. This could be useful for just taking a little bit of emphasis out of the currently playing track. Now, if you don't want to hold that button down, you want to go do something else with your hand, then you can hold down shift and press it. So for instance, the build up, taking my hand off the button now, and that carried on happening. So shift and a button will allow that to play away without you actually having to have your hand on that button. And the final 2 functions on the pads are beat jump and beat jump 2. And what beat jump does is move through the currently playing track by the number of beats that these pads represent their pairs of pads. So this pair, this pair, this pair, and this pair. So this is going to move backwards and forwards by 1 beat, and it tells you on the Jogwheel as well. That's 1 beat back, 1 beat forward. This is going to be 2 beats back and forward. You can see it moving here. You can probably hear it a little bit, but it's respecting the rhythm, and you can see it here. This is 4 back and forward, and this is 8 back and forward. You can see them moving around here. You also see it moving around here on the master waveform. But you can hear how it's respecting the rhythm of the track. Now by pressing the beat jump button again, we get another set of values. We have a half beat one here, which we don't have on the first set. Moving forwards and back by half a beat. We have 2 beats and 4 beats, which are the same as the other set, but this is a 16 beat instead of an 8 beat. We're moving quite quickly through the track. You can see the waveform down here, and you can see the line showing where we are on the track. These are also usable when you've got a loop playing. So I'll just set a quick loop there. The loop's playing on the track, and we can see it here. These will still allow us to move, but the whole loop gets moved through the track. So you can see it's respecting where we are in the loop here, but the actual position of the track is moving backwards and forwards. So you're probably starting to realise what a creative tool this can be, to have a little section of the track that you're moving backwards and forwards in the mix, but it's staying with the beat. It can sound really good if you have a short loop playing on an a cappella, for instance. And so the a cappella has got this little part of a voice looping, and you're just moving rhythmically backwards and forwards through the a cappella, looking for interesting loops. It's something that producers use a lot nowadays. It's a really easy way of replicating it on DJ controllers. So that brings us to the end of our look around the pads. Now I want to show you a few audio things on the mixer. We'll cover off a couple of things that we haven't looked at in full detail so far, and then move on to look at the sound color and the beat effects. Now the EQs have got 2 settings. So if you're playing a track and you turn the EQ down like this, that's completely gone, right? And that's because it's set to isolator. You see it says EQ ISO. If I hold down the shortcut button here, we get a choice here. So I'm now going to set it to EQ instead. And now you can still hear the track when you do this. Electronic DJs may well prefer isolator mode. More open format DJs may well prefer EQ mode. But ultimately, it's up to you how you have that set. You do have the choice there. Now, these two meters here are adjusted by these 2 knobs here. They're your input volumes. So I can turn this down and the input volume will go down on that channel. Turn it up and it will go into the red. You want it somewhere where it's high but not in the red. Same with the other channel. The middle one is what the master output's doing. That's deciding how loud the overall volume is. And this is important because you've got the left-hand channel, the right-hand channel, the microphone, the auxiliary input. Just because your inputs are all not distorting, when you put them all together, that middle meter, stereo meter, will show you whether the actual full output is too loud. And if it is, you have to turn the master down. So the rule is use the input meters to set the levels nice and loud for the inputs, and then keep an eye on the master meter and turn that one down if it's starting to go into the red, to make sure that there's no distorting going on. There are ways of adjusting both the crossfader and the up faders to suit your style of DJing. Let me show you what I mean. If the crossfader is set in the middle here on the crossfader curve knob, then this is going to fade out slowly as it reaches the other side. So if you've got 2 tracks playing there, it will be a smooth mix. But if it's set to the right hand side, then this is more like a switch. So now the track will be fully on until it gets all the way to the other side. Fully on, fully on, fully on. Still, it's as loud there as it is there. We have to go all the way, literally to that last millimeter to turn it on or off. So it's just like a switch. And scratch DJs love this because it gives you the control you need to perform scratch patterns. You will probably want it set in the middle unless you are a scratch DJ. That's going to be best for most types of music and for most types of mixing, because it just dips the volume of both slightly in the middle so that you don't get the main meters going too high when you've got two things playing. So set it in the middle unless you've got a reason not to. And through just turns the whole crossfader off. So then the only faders you can use are the up faders. Now you can also adjust the curves on the up faders, the curve being the way it gets louder and quieter. In the shortcut menu, we have 3 choices here for the channel curves. Again, you're probably going to want to leave it in the middle unless you've got a particular preference for using one of the other 2. So let's look at the first of the 2 major sets of effects that you get on the XDJ-RX3. It's really quite generous with the effects here. And the first set are called the sound color effects. And the sound color effects are the effects that you can dial in and out using these knobs here. So you have 6 of them and you press the effect you want. That effect is now across both decks. You don't get a choice, you just set it and it's going to be the same on both of these knobs. And the idea is when you turn the knob away from the center click, it's now clicked at 12 o'clock, you get 2 different effects related to the one you pressed. So we press space and I'm now going to turn this to the left. Giving us a big reverb, and then do it to the right. So we're getting the reverb effect added to either the low frequencies or the high frequencies, depending on which way we turn it. Now, nicely, we also have a parameter knob here, which makes these really quite flexible. And the parameter knob here is basically how much of the effect you hear. So if we're all the way on there, this makes it bigger, a bigger sounding effect. So moving on to dub echo, one of my personal favorites. Gives us a nice echo effect. And again, it depends on which way you turn it as to what frequency is affected. And again, this is basically the intensity. This could be a nice one to stop the track playing on. That's where to end a set or to make a big change in genre, for instance. So the sweep effect sounds like this. What it's doing is gating the music. It's like turning the crossfader on and off. And the parameter here is deciding how much of the sound gets through and how much of it gets cut off. Now you turn it the other way and it's what's called a bandpass filter. And this is deciding where the filter affects. So it's worth talking about this one. A bandpass filter, whereas the normal filter, which we're going to get to at the end, and which is an effect you'll know, either filters out all the low frequencies or all the high frequencies. A bandpass filter filters out a small section of the frequencies. It could be a small section from the low, or the low middles, or the middle, or the mid-high, or the high. It's like, imagine a bell curve being pulled left and right over the frequencies. And so you can get a really nice effect there. You can hone in on a certain sound to emphasize it or whatever. So that's a really nice one as well. There's some really creative effects that they've put in here. It's surprising to see so many good effects built into a unit like this. And I want to move on now to the next one. And the next one is a little bit more obvious, the noise effect. And in the other direction. So 2 variations there. And here. Makes it higher or lower as far as the volume goes. You go completely crazy at the top here. Now notice Notice I've stopped the record. The noise effect is unique in that it will work when there's nothing playing. It's adding audio to the signal. Now this is useful if you want to have noise going. You can set this to cut. And you can mess around with it that way by having the noise on one channel and mixing it over what's going on the other channel. Again, creative uses for these cool effects that are built into the unit. So crush is like an 8-bit effect. It just basically crushes the sound to give you a kind of lo-fi distortion. And there's a filtered version of it here. High filter plus crush. And you can guess what the parameter does. Makes it more pronounced. And then finally, it's really the classic, which is the filter. Back in the day, these knobs only had filter on them and all the others have been added. It cuts off the high frequencies to leave just low, and cuts off the low frequencies to leave just high. And that kind of resonance, that kind of musicality is what's affected by the parameter. We turn the parameter all the way down and it's pretty much like an EQ control, like a one knob EQ control. It's still useful because it's like turning your EQs, but you can do it all on one knob. Like a tone control really. But as soon as we add in the parameter, we get that musicality, that kind of whooshing. And it's that musicality that kind of gives the filter its enduring popularity. Right, let's take a look at the other set of effects, which are the beat effects. The beat effects are down this side here. And so from the top, these are the controls that halve or double the cycle that the effect loops through. So if the effect is set to 1 beat, it's going to do its thing and then get back to the beginning after a beat. You press this button here to move it up to 2 beats and 4 beats and 8 beats in the same way that we've seen with the looping functions, for instance, and you're going to see the effect take longer and move it down to half a beat, quarter of a beat, eighth of a beat, and the effect is going to cycle more quickly. The big difference between the beat effects and the sound color effects is that with the beat effects, the cycle of the effect is something which is happening tied to a beat, whereas here it's happening tied to what you do on this. So the tap button is when we want to tap in the beat ourselves. This can be useful if the track we're playing hasn't been properly analysed or just for creative effect. We can tap in how quickly it happens. Now, before we talk about these, I want to talk about time, because time is also related to these three. Time slows down and speeds up how quickly the effect cycles again. So for instance, if we were set to 1 beat here, I could use time to get down to half a beat, but of course that gives me all the different time cycles between the two. So imagine like a trombone player, right? A trombone player's got every note. A piano player's only got the individual notes, right? You can only play this note or this note. You can't play all the little bits in between. A trombone player can. So just think of the time as the kind of trombone version of this. It's good for adjusting it finely. And you can also use this while the effect is turned on to give you some creative stuff as well that you couldn't do with just this button. Okay, so let's talk about these two. This one here, simple. This just chooses the currently selected effect. And this one here chooses what is affected. And there's a lot of choice here. So you can have it set to whatever is set to crossfader A. You can have it to set to whatever is set to crossfader B. Remember, the crossfader doesn't have to be set to deck A and deck B. You can have it set to the microphone for putting reverb or echo on a vocalist, for instance. Have it set to the auxiliary input for whatever you might have on there. And then you can have it set to deck 1 and deck 2, hard to deck 1 and deck 2, no matter what the crossfader is set to do. And finally, you can have it set to the master output. In other words, everything that's going through the unit will be sent through. I'm going to leave it set to the master for this demo, although seeing we're going to use deck 1, I could equally have set it to deck 1. Okay, let's have a listen through all of them. Starting off down here at delay, and turn it on here. You can hear a delay there. And when I stop it, you can hear it very clearly. delay. Now I can adjust the delay here. It's now set to 1 beat. You can see that at the top, 2 beats, 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you heard it echo that 4 beats there because that's what it was set to. Now actually echo is the next effect, and echo is a little bit different because delay only does it once, whereas echo will echo the whole effect out. So let's start that playing, set it back to 1 beat. And you can hear that echoing out. So the level and depth control here is the intensity of the effect between nothing, even though it's on, can't hear it, and everything. And I'm stopping the track here just so you can hear that echoing out. And again, we can adjust it using the beat. Give us a 2 beat echo, or a much shorter echo, half a beat. And these can be adjusted on the screen as well on the cross pad up here. The next one is called Ping Pong, and this delays the sound across the left and right stereo field. If you're listening to this on headphones, you'll hear this quite clearly. Hear that echo? It's called Ping Pong because it ping pongs left and right. The next one is called Spiral. Spiral is one of those effects that is really quite nice. A lot of people are quite fond of Spiral. It's like a reverb kind of effect. And I'm using the level and depth control here just to really accentuate that. In this instance, the cross pad allows us to change the cutoff frequency of the filter, and that really just means it's going to change the color of the sound. To give us some variations on what that sounds like. So the next one is a straight up reverb. Here again, the X-Pad, cross pad is going to give us the cutoff frequency for the filter, but this is going to sound more just like a classic reverb. To the left, we're reverbing more on the lower frequencies, and to the right on the higher frequencies. The next one is the transform effect. This is actually quite similar to one of the effects we looked at over here on the sound color effects, but you've got more control here. So on the transform effect, I'm going to set it to half a beat, set this track playing, and then I'm going to punch it in, bang on a beat. So you can hear that's cutting the sound in and out. Now again, just like we used the parameter here to make this change, this affects how much of it cuts in and out. There's normally a sweet spot like there that sounds really nice. And then we can use the cross pad or the beat effects buttons to jump that around, so we can have a quarter beat cut in and out. Or a 1 beat. The next one is a filter, which is similar to the filters we saw here, but in this instance, the filter will cut in and out without us having to do anything. That's set to 4 beats, but we can have it set to higher, 8 beats. The level and depth control will decide how much of that filter we get. And this is kind of instant control over the length of the filter when we use the cross pad there. The next ones are related to each other, the flanger and the phaser. These are kind of like the whooshy effects, for want of a better word. Let's set this to quite a high value, like 8. It's like that plane taking off effect. Or similar to what it sounds like when an emergency vehicle goes past you and you hear the siren kind of modulating to a different tone. And flanger is similar. Sorry, that's actually phaser. I got those two the wrong way around. You can hear they're quite related. I always think phaser is a little bit like a plane taking off, you know, when a plane flies past you on a runway, especially when it's set to a high value like this. Again, a popular effect. I'm sure you can think Think of times where you've heard this in music. Now, pitch is an interesting one. That's the next one. The pitch effects lets you change the pitch of the track. This is one of those where using the time might be a more creative way to use the effect. You can see how far away from the original pitch it's moved here. And if you use the level depth control and turn that all the way on, it doesn't mix it with the original track, which probably sounds nicer. So you're speeding up and slowing the track down without actually speeding it up and slowing it down, which is the opposite of turning the master tempo switch on and then moving the tempo fader, which speeds it up and slows it down without changing the pitch. So you kind of got the opposite going on there. The next one is slip roll, one that's loved by DJs who like to live remix. So slip roll, it's best to just show it to you. Let's have a listen to slip roll. You've heard this one before, haven't you? It gives you that roll effect, which is really useful when you're trying to accentuate breakdowns. Standard roll on the next one. Related to slip roll, but it's not got the slip control turned on at the same time. And then vinyl break gives you that classic vinyl stop that we heard on the release effects as well. But you get more control over it here than you would on the release effect. And we're going to move on now to the last one, which is Helix. I'm not even going to try and describe that one to you. Kind of a metallic, reverby echo out, but it sounds great. And it really completes a great set of beat effects there, as good as on a Pro Mixer, which is awesome to see. And one more thing, in the shortcut menu, this Quantize here turns Quantize on or off for the effect. We know what Quantize does already. This is the same thing for the effects. So your beat effects, your echoes, your delays and so on will be, and even your gating effect, your transformer effect will be bang on the beat, even if you hit that button a little bit early or late. Especially for the transform effect, it's good to know you got that, because that effect can sound pretty messy if you trigger it a little bit too early or a little bit too late. Now, as we near the end of our tutorial, I want to talk you through every single setting on the utility menu. Now remember, there is a shortcut menu, and this does have a lot of the useful things on it that you might use more often than others. We've already looked at most of these. You've got your vinyl speed adjust for the decks, your channel fader curve, headphones mono split, your mixer mode. You can have the mixer to work as either a MIDI mixer for software or as a standalone mixer. That's useful if you're in software mode, using it to control Serato or Rekordbox. We've already looked at the EQ and the ISO. You've got different waveform colors here as well. And My Settings lets you load settings on your USB that you've already prepared. So all the stuff we're about to look at, you can set on here, and then you can have this put back into your main Rekordbox copy on your laptop, and then you can put it back on another USB. And basically, whenever you put a USB into the unit that is set for all your settings the way you like them, they will automatically be offered to you to just load up, so you don't have to go through all the stuff we're about to look at here. It's very useful if you're taking over from another DJ on Pioneer DJ gear. Right. This is the basics then, but there's a whole lot more. If we hold down the utility menu knob for more than a second, which will take us to this section here, hold it down again to go back to this one. Okay, so let's have a look through here. We use the knob here to move up and down through the list, and then you press the button to move left or right. So in other words, this is now choosing what we want, and this is now changing the thing we've chosen. Let's go through them all one by one then. So the first one is load lock. That's this word here, load lock. And the choices here are lock and unlock. This determines whether you can load another track onto a deck that's currently playing. You'll have that set to lock if you're being careful, or unlock if you like to load tracks quickly and you don't want to have to pause, stop the deck in order for that to be available to you. The next one is needle lock. Needle lock chooses whether, when you tap your hand on here, you can move through the track when it's playing. because if it's on lock, you're going to have to wait until the track is not playing. Quantize beat value, this sets the number of beats that the unit will jump to when you do something. So you could be setting a loop or whatever, it will jump to the nearest beat or the nearest half beat, quarter beat, eighth beat, and so on. And you can select those 4 values here by moving the knob left to right. The next one is Hot Cue Auto Load. Hot Cue Auto Load determines whether or not hot cues are automatically called up when you load a track. So really you should have this set to on. The reason you wouldn't have it set to on is that it takes time for the hot cues to load for your track. But really most DJs are just going to leave this set on. It doesn't take too long for the hot cues to load nowadays on standalone gear like this. Hot cue color decides whether the colors for the hot cues show on the pads or not. You can set colors in the system, but if you have that set to off, all the hot cues will be green. Auto cue level. This sets the sound pressure that auto cue recognizes as silence. So this is something that's worth talking about because we haven't covered this yet. You can have the unit set so that when it loads a track, it just puts the temporary cue point at the first noise it can hear. It can be quite useful if you've got a lot of tracks, like maybe you've got vinyl rips or stuff, which you've got a lot of silence at the beginning. And this will just always find a beat or something. And this just basically decides where it decides noise is, whether it decides noise is something quite loud or something quite quiet. It's not something most DJs will use, but it's good to know it's there if you want it. Slip flashing. Remember I told you how slip mode can really trip you up if you accidentally leave it on. This flashes lights to show you you've got it turned on. On-air display. This will show you whether the deck is playing on the waveform itself. And again, you've got a choice there of on or off. Vinyl speed adjust. We've talked about this. This decides whether when you start and stop the track playing, you get that vinyl sound, and touch is probably where you're going to want it set, where it'll start immediately but it'll slow down with a nice little vinyl sound. Play mode. This lets you choose whether the track plays and then stops, or whether the next track plays if you have it set to continue, or whether it repeats the current track, or whether it repeats the current playlist. So if you have it set to all repeat, it will play every track in the playlist forever. You might want to leave that set to continue if you are leaving music playing in a venue where you're not actually DJing at the moment, for instance, early on or whatever. Waveform current position sets where to display the current playback point on the waveform. The waveform's got a playback point on it, and you may want to see more or less of the track that's coming up. And so here you can set that to either the center, where you see equal track coming up to track that's been played, or left where you see more of the track that's coming up. Waveform divisions decides whether it shows you the waveform markers against phrases, which is musical beats and bars, or against the pure time in the track. It's just a very small little tweak there. Image on jog display is a nice one. You can have the artwork, if you've got artwork on your tracks showing on your jogs, or you can have a custom image that you can upload to the root of your USB. So you can have your DJ logo, for instance, showing on your jog wheels if you wanted. Okay, so that is the end of the deck settings. Now we can move on to the mixer settings. So on the mixer, the EQ curve, this is another way of changing what we were looking at on the EQs as to whether they turn the music totally off when you switch them all the way down. Channel fader curve, again, we looked at this, it's in the shortcuts. The master attenuator, this decides at what point the music is quietened down, should you be pushing the levels a little bit high. Same for the booth monitor there. The mic out to booth is a useful one. If your microphone is feeding back, it might be that it's coming through the speakers that are near to you in the DJ booth, and then you can turn it off there. That means it will only go out to the speakers that are on the dance floor and not the ones in the DJ booth. Mic out to master record, again, you might want to have your microphone to the crowd in the room, but the recording of the night, you might not want to have what you say to the crowd on, so you can turn that on or off there. Headphones mono split, we've talked about this, you've also got it in the shortcut. Mixer mode, it decides whether the mixer is controlled by MIDI or by the XDJ-RX3. In other words, it's a mixer basically controlling your software or just acting like a hardware mixer. Now, a few general ones here that you can set your language, you can set the brightness of the LCD, which can be useful when you're playing in daytime to make it a bit brighter. Same for the jogs. Screensaver, turn that off or on depending on whether you want it to go into Vegas mode when you leave it alone. You can calibrate the touch display here as well, and you can decide whether the unit goes into auto standby if you don't turn it off. And finally, I want to show you how to load your settings if you save them onto your USB drive and you've turned up at a venue and it's time to play. This is how to load all the clever settings that you've prepared beforehand. When you go to the source menu and you select your source here, you can also go to the My Settings menu here, and this will let you click load, which will load your settings from your USB into the player, and so you don't have to go through a whole pre-gig checklist of things to set them all up the way you want. Now, the XDJ-RX3 is an awesome unit, and I've just given you a comprehensive video tutorial on everything it does. But as I said at the beginning, that's not the full picture. If you're already a seasoned DJ, you now have everything you need to decide whether this is for you or to quickly get started with it if you've ordered it, or if yours has just arrived. But if not, the way we teach DJing in this book is, just like I said at the beginning, all about getting you out there quickly and actually doing this, and bypassing that trap of thinking you need to sit in your bedroom for months or years to learn this. And we also teach the 5 big areas of DJing. What I've just taught you lives in the first area, the gear, the tech, but it's only one part of the knowledge you need to DJ. As well as understanding your DJ console, you also need to understand how to plug it into a big PA system, how to gain stage for great sound, and lots of other geeky things. And there are the other areas as well. There's music. You need to know how to assemble, organize, and work a music collection, so you've always got the right track to play next. You need to understand the techniques of DJing, what to do in order to get the right sound coming out the speakers and to keep your dance floors full. You need to understand how to perform, because doing this in public is very different to doing it in your bedroom. And you also need to understand how to promote yourself, to get the gigs, how to get yourself out there so people naturally ask you to DJ and not someone else. It's only when you've got those 5 things, gear, music, techniques, playing out and promoting yourself, that you can actually start progressing as a DJ. They're not particularly hard to learn, but the big mistake most people make is only trying to learn one of them. And typically it's the techniques, it's the mixing. I just want to learn to mix, people say. And indeed, a lot of the DJ courses out there are all about mixing, including some of ours. But guess what? If you don't understand the gear, if you're hopeless at finding the music, if you're too scared to play in front of other people because no one's taught you through these steps, and if you haven't got a clue on how to get bookings anyway, well, honestly, it's not actually that useful being able to mix. So we discovered that the fast track to DJing success is to learn those 5 areas, which is how we teach. Now, I want you to have a free copy of our book where I'll help you get started in all those 5 areas, and you can get that by just joining Digital DJ Tips. All the links are underneath. And when you're ready, I'd be thrilled to have you as a student on our complete DJ course, where I'll share with you everything you need to know to become a great DJ across all those 5 areas. It works for all DJ gear, including this wonderful unit. And again, there's a link underneath for the complete DJ course. I'll see you there. Meanwhile, get good, get out there, and make the moments.